All right, welcome back everybody. If this is your first time to the channel, welcome to Notes to Fret, where we are all about turning theory into riffs. And in this video, we're going to start our discussion on chords, and specifically, we're going to be diving into triads. So this is really the first video regarding triads, so this is a good introduction to it. Here, if you have some knowledge of intervals, a little bit of familiarity with scales, you'll be just fine. We're gonna pretty much dive into what you need to know anyway. So jumping into this one, everyone should be good to go. So with that being said, before we do, take a look at the website. There are some free PDFs that you can download for kind of just worksheets to help you work through constructing chords on your own a little bit. And after watching this video, you'll see exactly what we're looking at for that. But it might be a good resource just for you to get a little bit of practice in. So with that being said, let's go ahead and talk about chords, and specifically triads. So we're going to spend a little bit of time on triads over the next few videos. So here, when we are looking at our triads initially, I want to talk about the construction of the triads. Okay, so here, these are terms that you're going to use, or you're going to hear oftentimes being used. We're going to talk about this. I have a different methodology, but regardless, these are two factual statements, and you will hear them said all the time, right? A triad is built using thirds, and this is often referred to as stacked thirds. And we'll look more at this as we kind of move through the video. But essentially what we're talking about when we're talking about triads is triads are constructed using three notes. However, there will be time when you hear somebody out there, they'll say it, triads are constructed using three tones. As guitar players, a half dozen in one, six in the other, right? A lot of purists out there will make the argument, for C as an example, right? You got C, E, and G, that makes up your triad. Those are three notes, but we've got six strings. So, we might play the E note twice, and, one of them might be an octave up. So some people argue multiple tones or multiple notes. So whichever one you want to use, you're 100% correct. It doesn't matter if you use, triads are constructed with three tones or three notes, you're perfectly fine. But that's kind of where it comes from. Again, as guitarists, they're pretty much used interchangeably. But the three tones or three notes are the root note. In this case, let's say we're doing a C major chord. C is the root. Then we have a third. In this case, again, if we're talking about our C, the third is an E, right? So our second is a D, our third is an E, and then it's up to the fifth, right? So the F is our fourth, and the G is our fifth, right? So that's where we get C, E, and G from, right? C is the root, E is the third, G is the fifth, and that's what gives us our triads. And we'll look more about at this throughout this video. Now, when we're looking at the chords within, any given example, right? The triads, major triad, minor triad, we have, again, here we're just looking at our root, our third, and our fifth. Now, when we talked about the stacked thirds a moment ago, if we look from our C to our E, that's a major third. And if we look from our E to our G, that's a minor third. Now, looking at this, you might go, okay, but you're not really seeing it. So what I want to do is kind of explore the actual construction of these triads. So we're just going to kind of move things around. And over here to the left, you can see that we have our intervals up again. And we're only going to the fifth, right? 7 frets up. We're not going to be worrying about the other intervals for the time being with triads. So here, we're not going to worry about our seconds, our fourths, and we're certainly not going to be worried about the tritone for the time being. So we're really concerned about our thirds and our fifths, and obviously our root, right? So taking a look, if we look at the scale itself, so we can see that in the middle of the page we have the C major scale, or C Ionian, and then up at the top we have a C major chord, okay? So let's take a look and talk about how do we go from the scale into the chord. Well, right off the bat, if we're going to evaluate this chord, looking down at the scale, we're going to look at the first, we're not really worried about our second, and then we're going to look at our third. Now, if we look at C to E, the distance, we have an actual whole step followed by another whole step, meaning that's 4 frets, right? Because one whole step is one whole step is 2 frets. So looking back at our fretboard, right? Here we are, we've moved up 1, 2, 3, we've moved up 4 frets. That's our major third. Okay, so we know right off the bat that the C major scale has a very first third as a major third, right? C to E, it's a major third. Now, next, we want to start at E, so we're going from our third to our fifth. Well, we're not worried about our fourth, so we're not worried about the F right now, but we're definitely worried about our fifths, in this case, which is G. And when we look at the distance from E to G, we have a half step followed by a whole step, which is 3 frets. So looking back at our fretboard, we're already on the 4th fret, right? We've already moved up from C to E. We've already moved up 4 frets. So now going from E to G, we need to move up an additional 3 frets. So we wind up on a perfect 5th, okay? Now here, if we go from C to G, right, we have the whole step, half step, whole step. That in fact is 7 frets. So we know that we have a perfect 5th. Now, you might be wondering, well, okay, what is this minor third? And this minor third from E to G is what a lot of people are talking about when they talk about stacked thirds. So I want to look at this just really quick, and then I'm going to come back to the perfect 5th. But with that minor third, again, if we're looking at E to G, we have a half step followed by a whole step. Now coming back over to our fretboard on the left-hand side, right, if we move up 3 frets, right, that's how many frets we've moved from E to G, we have our minor third, right? And so that's how we get that minor third. Now, looking at this triad, it's all of a sudden like, whoa, you know, what is it? Is it a major third and a minor third, or is it a major third with a perfect 5th? Well, it really kind of depends on how you want to break this down. So if we take a look down at the scale, if we look from C to E and then from E to G, we could break the whole triad down in kind of this double part here. The first third followed by the second third, right? So whole step, that gives us a major third, and then half step, whole step, and that gives us a minor third. You can break it down this way if you want. I prefer not to. I very rarely teach it this way, but I do want to put it out there so everybody understands it. But typically the way I look at it is I just have the third, and then, you know, I have the perfect 5th. And by the way, whenever you see a major third and a minor third together, regardless of which comes first or second, right, a minor third followed by a major third, or a major third followed by a minor third, you know a major third is 4 frets, and you know a minor third is 3 frets. So you're guaranteed to move 7 frets. So you're right off the bat, you can just look at it and go, okay, I have a perfect 5th, right? So just keep that in mind, because we're going to revisit this here in a second. But just keep that in mind when you're looking down at the scale. There's variations on how you can kind of pick it apart. So kind of giving us, you know, kind of a big picture of what we looked at in the previous slide here. If we want to say, what's a major triad? Well, you'll hear people talk about a major triad all the time. It's a major third over a minor third. I mean, okay, that's fine. It's just one more thing to remember these patterns with, right? And then what's a minor triad? Well, you know, a minor triad is a minor third over a major third. Again, it's just one more thing to remember. And you know, if you want to, if this is more comfortable for you, let me know down in the comments if this is the way that you kind of look at triads. I'd be very interested to hear what the majority of everyone thinks about this. But the way that I look at triads is you have a triad. Then what's the third? Is it a major third or a minor third, right? And so we're talking about going from C to E in this case, right? Going from my root to my third. Well, is that a major third? If the answer is yes, I've got a pretty good inclination that I'm dealing with a major triad. If, let's say I went from C to E flat, that would be a minor third. Then right off the bat, I'd be like, okay, I'm pretty sure I'm going to be dealing with a minor triad. And then, you know, we do, if it's out to the seventh or out to the perfect fifth, 7 frets up, okay, that's fine. So I don't worry about which one is over which and which one comes. I just look at the third and okay, fine. And then look at the seventh or look at the fifth. If it's a perfect fifth, I'm good to go. One thing I do want to bring up just really quick because somebody will bring it up. Oh, the fifth could be diminished or it could be augmented. Yes, they're 100% correct with that, right? There is absolutely no question about that. And that's some of the altered triads. We'll get into them. But if you do have an augmented or diminished fifth, that almost gives you the name of the chord right off the bat. So if you had a diminished fifth, pretty good chance you got a diminished chord, right? Augmented, pretty good chance you got an augmented chord. So we'll get into it more, but for the time being, you know, triads, look at the third. Is it a major or minor? And you're pretty much good to go. Just making certain that you have a perfect fifth, which for this video series, we will. So with that being said, you know, I'd be remiss if I didn't go over at least one minor chord as well. And so with that, I'm going to do the A minor chord. Now, keep in mind, we will get into chords and triads that have sharps and flats and everything else. But for this introduction, it's just easier to talk about them from a point of view with no major or no sharps or no flats. It's just an easier conversation. But we will dive into those in later videos of this series. But here with a minor, you can see that I have a minor third followed by a major third. Okay, but we also know that A to E is 7 frets, so that's a perfect fifth. So realistically, I can just kind of leverage that, and I don't even need to worry about this major third issue, right? Is it a minor over a major? I can just go, okay, A to C is a minor third, therefore I'm dealing with a minor triad, right? Because I already have a perfect fifth. But again, I want to break this one down just like we did with the major chord, just so we get a really good understanding of how these things are put together. So once again, we've got our intervals on the left-hand side of the screen. And all we're going to do is we're going to worry about our thirds and our fifths, right? We're not going to worry about our second, our fourth, or our tritone. Same as before, right? So here we're going to have the A minor scale, right? It's laid out. And one of the things to notice, and by the way, this is a spoiler alert for a slide that's coming up, but I do want to put it out there. You'll see down in the scale that A is the tonic, and you'll see up at the chord that the A is the root. Root is the bass note of the chord. Tonic is the first note in the scale. And this will make a lot more sense as we progress through our conversations with triads, when we start moving around the scale to construct variations on triads. So just keep that in mind. Even though we're comparing A minor chord to A minor scale, it might look like tonic and root are the exact same thing, but they're not. And when we dive into really breaking these things down quite a bit more, you'll see the difference. But for now, tonic is the first note in the scale, root is the bass note of the chord. So with that said, let's go ahead and take a look at the A minor chord. First, we're going to go from our root, which is A, and then we're not worried about our second. We are definitely worried about our third. And we see that from A to C, we have a whole step followed by a half step, which is 3 frets. So looking back at our fretboard, when we move up 3 frets, we get a minor third. And that's exactly what we have over on our chord. Now, you know, we need to look at from the third to the fifth, in this case from C to E. So when we go from C to D, we're not worried about D because it's our fourth. but then we get to our E, which is our fifth, which we're definitely worried about. And between C to E, we have a whole step followed by another whole step, or 4 frets. So from A to C, we've already moved up 3 frets. So now from C to E, we need to move up 4 frets. And so if we look back over at our intervals, we move up those 4 frets from our third, and we wind up on the 7th fret, or a perfect fifth, right? So if we count the intervals from A to E, that indeed is 7 frets, and therefore we have our perfect fifth. But just to keep things, for the stacked third conversation, let's evaluate what this major third is. Right now we're evaluating from C to E, kind of in isolation. And so again, when we look at C to E, it's 2 whole steps. So we know that's 4 frets. And when we look back at our intervals on the left-hand side, if we move up 4 frets, that's a major third, right? And so that gives us the major third of the chord. And so what that means is the number of intervals, or number of frets, from A to C is 3 frets. And so that's a minor third. And then how many frets are from C to E? Well, that's 4 frets. And so that's a major third. And this is the stacked third sort of thing that we spoke about. And again, if we look down at the scale, we can kind of see how we can break this out, right? From A to C is a minor third, and then C to E is a major third. And if that's the way you're comfortable, understanding that a minor chord is a minor over a major, then by all means. But again, I like to break them down as we were looking at. Again, I just look at the third. Is it a major or minor? And I've got a perfect fifth. So be it. And it's quicker for me, and I just kind of move on. So a couple things with that, kind of the baseline understood. This was the slide that I spoiled for you. Sorry, anybody who was watching this video for this slide, I spoiled it for you. But root versus tonic, right? Root is the bass note of the chord, and then tonic is the first note of the scale. Triads are constructed with the first, the third, and the fifth, or alternatively, you'll hear the root, the third, and the fifth. Both are just fine. As guitarists, we use them both pretty much interchangeably. You're correct either way. So here, what we need to pay attention to is in a triad, the third is either a major or a minor interval up from the root. And that's a little bit of an obnoxious statement. It's not really very clear. It is accurate, and you'll hear other musicians talk about it in this form. But let's look at it in a way from a frets perspective that will make just a little bit more sense to us. So here, when we're looking at C to E, well, we know that E is the third of C, right? D is the second, E is the third. That's 4 frets. So therefore, E is a major third up from the root, which in this case is C. And by the way, that A right there before the word major, that's the indefinite article. That's not a note. So I'm saying that E is a major third up from the root. So just that A is, again, it's not the note. It's the actual article of the sentence. So just want to put that out there. And if we look at another example, A to C, we know that C is the third up from A, and that's 3 frets. So we know that C is a minor third up from A, right? Or C is a minor third up from the root, right? So we kind of have the same exact thing. So that's what we mean when we say the third is, it's either a minor or a major third up from the root. That's what we mean with it. Now the fifth, it's either perfect or something else, right? For these videos, we're going to pretty much be sticking to the perfect fifth. But when we do get into some of the altered triads, when we do start having diminished fifths and augmented fifths, we'll talk about it. And it'll make perfect sense once we're in that conversation, because it's not anything too terribly difficult. So with that, one of the things with triads is we are going to be doing a lot with triads. So make certain that in this video you have a good solid foundation of the bass, because even though it's just 3 notes, right, and you don't ever want to have too many notes, I guess. If anybody understands that reference, give me a thumbs up in the comments if you understand where that reference came from. But for the triads, we're gonna be exploring a lot. So we're gonna obviously in our next video we're gonna start putting these triads onto the fretboard, so we can really see how we move from that construction to actually playing in variations on the fretboard. We'll get into altered triads again when we start talking about having augmented fifths or diminished fifths, whatever. We'll get into that quite a bit, and then we're going to be talking about inversions. This is a big one, huge component of triads, very powerful, and we'll also look at melodies over triads, and this is kind of how do you solo over a triad. What when you take your scales and you're kind of connecting them together on the fretboard, how do you marry up a harmony with your triads with a melody that makes sense rather than just kind of meandering through various patterns. We want to keep a tonal center sort of thing. So we'll talk more about that. And then we'll also talk about modal chord construction, right? So at that point, if you have some knowledge on modes, it's going to be very helpful. But again, we'll walk through pretty much most of what you're going to need with that. So, there's a lot coming up for triads. So again, make sure you have a good understanding of this video. So when the other more advanced topics do start coming up, you'll be ready for that. But with all that being said, I'm going to go ahead and stop the video here. As always, really appreciate you watching, and if you want to help the channel out, give me a thumbs up, subscribe, it's free, and again, that really helps me keep bringing you this material. So in the next one, we'll start looking at putting these triads onto the fretboard, and we will continue our conversation about triads in a much larger picture. So take care, everybody, and thanks again for watching.